proceed on it. The question of the Civil War in France. Lenin, right. Nothing you said suggests any reason why we should conclude that Lenin was right in saying there's a separate stage of socialism and a separate stage of communism. The Civil War in France says nothing about that. The Civil War in France talks about the period before communism. It is the dictatorship of the proletariat. It's where workers create the conditions for emancipating themselves. Socialism is presumably after that emancipation. So that, that's irrelevant. But as far as the thing on the whole question of the interpretation of the Gotha program, all I can suggest for now is that the talk that I gave in Cuba last year was basically exploring this question, and it will be published in Science and Society in, I think it's their October issue. And it's also, I'll develop these arguments further in the context of the book one of the books I'm working on right now, which is called The Socialist Alternative, Real Human Development. The question of and let me just say that, if you want to talk about, what Marx, thought, then you have to go back, to one of the few places where he develops many of his arguments on the whole question of a new society and the distinction between the becoming of a new society and the being of a new society, and that's in the Grimmets. If you want to understand, one of the points that I make in the article that will come out and also in the book is that you cannot possibly understand Marx's critique of the Gotha program without understanding his discussion of the relation of how capitalism emerges and how it emerges and subordinates all those elements, that are contrary to its logic and creates organs which it needs. The Gotha program. Anyway, that presumably will also be expanded at length in the book. The question of let me see. Alex's thing about, let me come back to Josh. The working class should be making these decisions. It should organize independently and decide what to do. What working class are you talking about? Are you talking about the 50% of the working class that is in the informal sector? How are you going to organize? How are you going to get that working class to make these decisions? Or are you talking about the portion of the organized working class that is in the state sector? They're not, they're in the state sector already. Or are you talking about the relatively minuscule portion of the working class which is in the organized capitalist sector, in the capitalist sector? Let's not talk abstractions. Let's talk about the reality of Venezuela. Venezuela has a very, hollowed out economy in which there is very little, capitalist development, in there because they relied upon oil. Oil was the sector. It was not heavily employment generating, and because of the oil exports, they were the currency ratios were such as they ended up importing all their food. The agriculture basically dissolved. All the peasants came out of the countryside to live in the hills outside the cities. They have, their manufacturing, that was all developing in the 70s, completely disappeared, pretty well disappeared. There are factories that are being put back into operation now that have been idle since the 70s. So, let's not talk about, fictitious countries or models. Let's talk about the real Venezuelan. Who is the working class that is going to make these decisions? Well, one way to reach that working class, which is a working class which is in the informal sector, is to get them in their homes, get them in their neighborhoods. It's always been a myth that the only form of organizing working class is in the trade union. You organize working class in their neighborhoods as well, and that's what the communal councils are all about, a process of reaching workers, working people in their neighborhoods, reaching the poor in their neighborhoods, to make demands, to be recognized that they, like Chavez had argued from prison in 1993, must not only be the objects of change, but the subjects of change. that's a whole process. But don't talk about this. Working class should rise up and should make the decisions, when you can't even identify what that working class is. The question of Alex's point about 8 years, it's enough time has gone on. I'm impatient. Time for nationalize everything. People want fundamental change. Yes, they want fundamental change, and they're getting it. They recognize they're getting it. But if you ask them, why aren't you getting what you think you need, they're not going to say the oligarchy. They're not going to say the banks. They're not going to say these companies like Polar. They're going to say it's the corrupt Chavez officials. They are the ones that are doing it. That's, if you go to every community, that's who they identify as what is holding back their gains. And that's where the struggle is. That's what people recognize as the struggle. That's why the battle against corruption and clientelism is the key fundamental contradiction at this point, because that is what, that's where people are at. They will struggle on that issue. And that's why the community councils are important, and the party.
Did you make the same time?
You do what people recognize as the problem. You don't stand outside, in Canada and say, or with a small group which is very isolated, the CMR. I like their positions on many questions, but they are really small and not making many inroads, except for a few factories that have been that they're organizing and have seized, and doing very good jobs. I wish the rest of the labor movement was doing similar kinds of things. But the problem is that that's not what people in general are seeing as their problem, and you have to start with what people think. So, let me see where else we're going. Land reform. The legislation does call for land reform. That land which is idle, which is not in use, can be taken over by the state for public purposes. The cases that are happening is that the state is often very slow to do this. And so what is happening is that the cooperatives, which have been formed under Volvonkaris, and have found that the land that they were assigned isn't very good, are moving in and taking over the latifundias. That they are simply moving in and clearing the land, land which is idle, and taking it and are protected by the state in the process. So that's part of the process that's happening there too. But the law is there, and they are acting in accordance with the law, even if the local officials, the local governors, in many cases the governors who should be acting, who haven't acted. Where does the let me just say something about Ernie's question. I think it was Ernie and some other. It's a question that keeps coming up, which is, well, we read Marx and we see, and Marxism, and we see that there is going to be a final crisis, revolutionary crisis. When's it going to happen? By my calendar, it's going to be such and such. Okay. I think that what we, I'm in Venezuela and I'm sort of writing and doing I think some interesting stuff, but I'm learning more than I'm teaching there, and I think that's what we have to do. We have to forget about every word that we inherited from Marx, from Lenin, etc., and learn something from a real revolutionary process. And we learn that. These things are more complicated than we thought. That there are all these, it's not linear, there are all these things happening simultaneously around the country. One of the most interesting things happening in Venezuela is that there are processes happening in different parts of the country in which people are doing the same thing and they don't know about each other. And so an important thing is connecting them and bringing together in conferences, and that's not easy to find them, So I really think that, we have to. I'm a Marxist. I think, I live, breathe it. I've taught it for 30 years, and now I can see, its usefulness. I always see its usefulness.
Otherwise, you're condemning the rest of us.
But no, I think that we have to be prepared to recognize that, that Marxism is not formulous. You know, it's an approach, it's an understanding, it's looking for the class question, it's looking for contradictions, it's looking for a whole series of things, and all revolutions are going to be different, but one of the things that Venezuela does teach you is that there isn't necessarily the final crisis, the revolutionary crisis. It's a series, that's what I was trying to suggest. It's a series of obstacles, barriers that capital puts forward, and you drive beyond it. And if you don't drive beyond it, it's the end of the revolution. You know. The co-op movement. Yeah, there's a lot that that co-ops should be doing in relationship to Venezuela as trying to make links. There are some differences. Very clearly. There are problems in the co-ops in Venezuela, and many of the co-ops are purely replicating the Yugoslav thing of complete self-interest. Shortages of what they produce in Venezuela, but they go and sell them in Colombia instead because you can get dollars in Colombia sales, and then on the black market get more bolivars than if they sold them locally. There are real problems of that self-interest happening, which I don't know whether Canadian trade cooperatives are going to be any different. They'll say, yeah, you're doing the right thing. You're maximizing the income of your members, et cetera, like that. But I think there are interesting things, and one of the things I'm sort of aware of is there is a cooperative movement in Nova Scotia, which is involved. It's called, I think it's Just Us or something, which is involved in fair trade things, and there is a connection that's being attempted to be made between them and cacao co-ops in Venezuela, with the idea that there is a Nestle's factory, and this is just coming up in the last week. There's a Nestle's factory which is empty, in which the government had thrown lots of money into, the Nova Scotia government, and the idea would be to perhaps use that as a processing element for Venezuelan cacao. I've sort of been connecting with people and talking about the possibility that the Minister for the Communal Economy, who I'm in contact with, might be in fact interested in sort of establishing the relationship, and in fact I suggest might even want to buy it, and run it as a state-owned Venezuelan company processing locally, because so much of their cacao is going overseas to Europe, to Nestle's, et cetera, and then shipped back into Venezuela. The sixth motor. The sixth motor was originally, as I heard about it, was to be the economic model. It was, the reason I thought that this was not going to, be coming forward is from the people who were, in charge of bringing it forward. Two of the ministers that I thought were, not going to come up with anything very, acceptable. So it never happened. But we may, in fact, see, the sixth motor, beginning to sort of emerge under a different name. And that is this whole emphasis that Chavez gave yesterday about planning, a process of planning, and that might be where he wants to go. Instead of talking about the sixth motor, talking about a commission on planning. But it's the economy, and it's also a question of, I think, worker management, worker involvement of that. And that's why it's such a difficult question at this point, because not only is it difficult in terms of what will happen with workers, et cetera, it's a problem with the labor minister and with the Minister of Oil.
Good. Danielle?
Yeah,
Sorry about that.
just a little.
I think Mike's going to finish.
No.
Then Danielle?
Okay. Very quickly, it's just, Alex, there's no solution that is a formula that is going to come from anybody that is going to be imposed on Venezuela. This process is Venezuelan by roots, and it's going to continue to be Venezuelan. No one is going to impose anything. It's coming from the ground as a ground movement, and it's going to continue that way. Who knows? 8 years, 12 years, 20 years. Chavez's plan, if he lives that long, is 3 cycles of 7 years each. And that might be the case. I don't know whether he's going to be the leader during that time, but he's making plans that far in advance. What do you need? You need a generation to change a lot of things that are happening in Venezuela. You cannot have things like that. If we could have things like that, we could have had a lot of things very well changed here in Canada a long time ago. And we haven't been able to do that. So you need to have time to have change, and change happens. We didn't take the government by the arms. This is a social revolution, needs some time to do all the planning and the work that we have to do. We're going to make mistakes. We have made mistakes. Chavez has recognized that there have been some mistakes, but we're moving forward, like Michael said. There's no way back, okay? One question that I wanted to address from the compañera here is what can Canada do to help Venezuela? Well, there are two things that you tell me there. One is the government of Canada is going to do nothing but put obstacles in the courts. What can we do? We can do a lot of things. And we heard about them already. Organize yourself, inform yourself. We can be a resource for you. We can give you resources to give and to discuss everywhere. Belong to organizations that are planning actions and are planning defense of the revolution in case something happens or in case any attack happens of any sort. Then that's what we can do actually as people, and we can do as women and members of society, and men and members of society. In terms of the communal councils, you mentioned about 16 years of age for belonging to the communal council. There is beautiful pictures of people, Venezuelan women and men with their children in there, sitting there, because in Venezuela there's no, you babysitting and somebody's going to be in a room, you're going to be listening to everything with your child by your feet. And then that's what they're going to be, and they're going to be brought up that way. And this is the generation that we're counting on.
Two quick points, three actually, I realize. One is the question about nationalization of the oil. They basically control the oil that the old industries that they previously were, that's part of the whole PDVSA. Their recent moves into the heavy oil sector have taken away the control from the companies to now majority ownership for the state. But not simply majority ownership, management. So that's that's a key question. So effectively, the multinationals, which have a lot of skills, which the Venezuelan oil people do not have, that they in this sector in heavy oil, that they will be able to use those skills, and but they are in control. The question of Chavez mode, can it survive Chavez because of the issue of likely attempts at assassination, and plots are discovered regularly. And there's if you ever hear about canceled meetings of Chavez was supposed to be in such and such place, it's because of a security alert. That I would say that every day I get more confident that it can survive Chavez, because there are, the process is developing people. Whether it can that's a question of struggle. I mean, these things, there's no formula, but it gets better, I think, regularly in that respect. And then the last question is relates to can the Venezuelan model be replicated elsewhere, especially like in Latin America, et cetera, like that. And I would say that if you look at Bolivia, if you look at Ecuador, which presumably are the places where people have in mind where it might be replicated, that it will not be replicated elsewhere unless the leaders are prepared to put the masses in motion.
Thank you.